is Rachel. I wouldn't say my life was perfect, but I always reminded myself to be thankful, knowing things could be worse. I've been married to my husband, James, for 7 years. Most of the time we've spent together has been good, especially at the beginning. But over the years, I noticed James became more focused on his job than on me. He stopped asking me how I felt or really talking to me. Still, I tried everything I could to keep our marriage strong. James has a son from his previous marriage, Logan. Logan is nothing like his dad. When we first met, he was a little distant. But over time, he grew close to me. When we spent time together, he would really listen and try to understand me. It was something I had been missing. One day, everything changed. James went on a 3-day work trip. I thought I'd have the house to myself, but Logan unexpectedly knocked on the door. He had come back from college for a short vacation and wanted to see his dad. When he found out James wasn't home, he said, "Well, I guess it's just us then," and walked in. We decided to make dinner together. At first, everything seemed normal in the kitchen, but then I noticed he was watching me. I thought I might be imagining it, but there was a moment where I couldn't ignore the way he was looking at me. That evening, we had a long talk. Logan usually spoke about his goals and plans, but that night, he opened up emotionally. He told me how distant his dad had always been with him. That was when I realized it wasn't just me who felt lonely in this house. He felt it too. These shared feelings brought us closer, and I could see how easily emotions could blur the lines of right and wrong. I knew I had to stop it, but at the same time, I felt so confused. Logan stayed in the living room late that night. We started watching a movie together, but I couldn't focus on it because my mind was racing. I noticed him looking at me differently, which made me both uncomfortable and oddly intrigued. After the movie, we kept talking while sitting there. Talking with him made me feel more at ease than I had in a long time. With James, our conversations always circled back to work, and he often brushed me off. But Logan really listened, and I felt understood in a way I hadn't in years. Eventually, it got very late, and I told him he should go to bed. Logan looked at me for a moment and said, "It feels so good talking to you. Can I stay a little longer?" His words deepened the emotional confusion I was already feeling. I agreed, and we sat quietly for a while. Then Logan said softly, "Sometimes I realize how much I need someone to talk to. Someone like you." His voice was gentle and sincere. I smiled and replied, "I'm glad you feel that way. I'm happy you're here." I hadn't considered how my words might affect him. Logan looked at me, reached out, and took my hand. "I don't know if I should say this, but I think you're amazing," he said. I was stunned. I didn't know what to say or do. I wanted to pull my hand back, but I couldn't move. For a moment, it felt like my loneliness and his emptiness had connected us. But I knew I had to end it right away. I gently pulled my hand back and said, "Logan, what you just said caught me off guard. Here's the rewritten version of your story based on the instructions. My name is Sarah. I wouldn't say my life was perfect, but I always reminded myself it could be worse. I've been married to my husband, David, for 7 years. The first few years were good, but as time passed, David started putting his work ahead of everything else, including me. He stopped asking how I was doing or paying attention to my feelings. I did everything I could to keep our marriage going. David has a son from his first marriage, Ryan. My name is Rachel. I wouldn't say my life was perfect, but Ryan is very different from his dad. When I first met him, he seemed distant, but over time, he became close to me. He listened when I talked, something I hadn't felt in years. His attention made me feel seen. One day, everything changed. David left for a 3-day work trip, and I thought I'd have some time alone. But Ryan showed up at the door. He was home from college for a short break and wanted to spend time with his dad. When he found out David was away, he said, "Well, it's just us then," and walked in. We decided to make dinner together. At first, it all felt normal, but then I noticed Ryan watching me. I thought I might be imagining it, but there was a moment when I couldn't ignore the way he was looking at me. That night, We had a long talk. Ryan usually talked about his dreams and goals, but this time, he opened up about how distant his dad had always been. Hearing this, I realized I wasn't the only one feeling lonely in this house. We shared a quiet understanding. These feelings brought us closer, but I knew it was wrong. I tried to push those thoughts away, but I couldn't stop feeling conflicted. Ryan stayed up late in the living room. We watched a movie, but I couldn't focus because my mind was all over the place. His presence felt comforting, but it also unsettled me. When it got late, I told him he should head to bed. He looked at me and said, "It feels so good talking to you. Can I stay a little longer?" His words deepened my confusion. I let him stay a while, and we sat in silence. After some time, Ryan said, "You know, being around you makes me feel better. You're different." His words made my heart race. I didn't know what to say. I smiled awkwardly and replied, "I'm glad you feel that way." But then he reached out and took my hand. "I think you're special," he said softly. I froze. I knew this was wrong, but a part of me couldn't pull away. I eventually managed to gently take my hand back. "Ryan, this is a bit unexpected," I said. He immediately apologized. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line." "I respect you so much," he said, standing up quickly. "Good night, Sarah," he added before heading to his room. I couldn't sleep that night. My thoughts were a mess. I kept replaying everything in my mind, unsure of where this would lead. The next morning, Ryan acted as if nothing had happened. He was cheerful at breakfast, while I struggled to hide my confusion. When David returned from his trip, things seemed normal on the surface, but I knew something had shifted inside me. That brief moment with Ryan stayed in my mind, even though I knew it was dangerous. Months passed. Ryan went back to college, and the house returned to its usual routine. David remained distant, coming home late, barely speaking to me, and spending most of his time in front of the TV. We felt like strangers living under the same roof. When Ryan's next college break approached, I learned he'd be staying with us again. I felt both anticipation and guilt. When he arrived, everything felt the same, but I couldn't ignore the warmth in his eyes. I tried to keep my distance, but it wasn't easy. One evening, when David worked late, Ryan suggested, "Do you want to sit outside for a bit?" We ended up on the porch swing, looking at the stars. After a long silence, Ryan said, "Being here always makes me feel good. You know that, right?" My heart started racing, but I nodded. "My dad and I don't have a strong bond," he continued. "But you make me feel like I matter." His words touched me but also frightened me. He turned to me, looking directly into my eyes. "I can't keep these feelings inside anymore. I care about you more than I should." I stood up, trying to steady myself. "Ryan, this can't happen. I'm your stepmom." "It's not right," I said, though even I could hear the hesitation in my voice. "You're right," he said. "But I needed you to know how I feel." He stepped back, giving me space, but I knew the tension between us hadn't gone away. As time went on, I couldn't escape these feelings, even though I knew they were wrong. Ryan's presence made me feel alive, but it also made me feel deeply uneasy. One morning, after David left early for work, Ryan sat next to me at breakfast. "I don't want to make things hard for you," he said quietly. "But these feelings are real." I didn't know what to say. His words made me feel torn between what I knew was right and what my heart was whispering. Things only became more complicated when David started noticing the tension. One evening, David came home early and saw Ryan and me talking in the kitchen. He looked at us for a moment, then asked with a hint of sarcasm, "What's so funny?" Ryan quickly made a joke to change the subject, but David's expression made me uneasy. That night, David asked me, "Do you still love me?" His voice was different, filled with doubt. I hesitated before saying, "Of course I do." But deep down, I wasn't sure he believed me, or if I believed myself. Here's the rewritten version of your story in a more American context and with basic language, maintaining the original meaning. Jason's words completely threw me off. I couldn't say a word. In that moment, I realized how confused I had become about my feelings. It had been so long since I felt this understood, and so alone at the same time. But just as I was trying to process everything, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. It was David's car. He had come home early, having cancelled his meeting. Panic set in. Jason froze, his face filled with tension, and quickly went to his room. When David walked in, he looked around as if he sensed something was off. "You seem a little out of it, Sarah. Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice calm but with a hint of suspicion. I forced a smile and said I'm fine. But inside, I was struggling to hide my emotions. That night, we all stayed in separate rooms, but I couldn't sleep. I could tell David was starting to pick up on something, even if he wasn't sure what it was yet. And despite David being home, I caught Jason stealing glances at me when he thought no one was watching. As the days passed, the situation became harder to handle. It wasn't just between Jason and me anymore. David was slowly getting pulled into this tangled mess. David's suspicions grew. He'd watch me closely, ask sudden questions, and stay unusually quiet at times. Jason, on the other hand, didn't stop showing his feelings for me, even when David was around. The tension in the house was suffocating. One evening, David decided to have a family dinner. The three of us sat at the table, and the air was thick with unease. Breaking the silence, David looked directly at me and said, "Sarah, something doesn't feel right. Is there something you need to tell me?" The room went silent. My throat felt tight, and I couldn't get any words out. Then David turned to Jason. "Jason, you've been acting strange too. What's going on here?" "I want the truth." Jason hesitated but finally stood up. "Dad, maybe you should think about how you've been treating her. Sarah has always supported you, but you don't even notice her," he said. I froze, shocked by his words. David, on the other hand, jumped out of his chair, his face red with anger. "What are you trying to say?" he shouted. The argument between them escalated quickly. Jason accused David of neglecting me, saying he didn't treat me the way I deserved. David, now fully realizing Jason's feelings, completely lost it. That night, everything fell apart. David demanded that Jason leave the house. "You're not welcome here anymore. Sarah and I didn't end up like this because of you, but you don't belong here now," he said. Without arguing, Jason packed his things and left. Watching him walk out the door broke my heart. I felt like I had lost both of them at the same time. After Jason left, the house became eerily quiet. But that silence didn't bring me any peace. The bond between David and me was beyond repair. As the days passed, the distance between us only grew. David tried to mend things, but the trust was gone. One day, I decided it was time to let go. I told him I wanted a divorce. When I said it, I saw sadness in his eyes, but he didn't seem surprised. He agreed without a fight. After the divorce, it took me a long time to heal. I never saw Jason again, though I heard he had moved on and was doing well. As I rebuilt my life, I reflected on everything that had happened. I learned that letting emotions take over can lead to consequences we can't undo. Looking back, I can see the weight of the choices I made. Those mistakes shaped who I am today. I've moved on from that dark chapter and found a sense of peace knowing it's all behind me. For now, I want to end this story here. The second part of this story, where I share even more personal and exciting moments, is coming soon. If you'd like to hear it, please subscribe. I'm sure you'll enjoy it.